Julia Simmons had spent her entire life valuing order, history, and the comfort of knowing what came next. At 68, she had traded the classroom full of restless teenagers for quiet mornings of coffee and crossword puzzles. Yet on that spring afternoon at O'Hare International Airport, her life shifted in a way no lesson plan could have prepared her for. Her son, David Simmons, had just boarded a flight to London. He was a financial director at a large investment firm, calm and rational, never one for dramatics. Julia and her 7-year-old granddaughter, Emily, stood at the window watching the plane taxi away. Emily clutched her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Bunny, to her chest, a familiar comfort on a day that was supposed to be routine. Then came the whisper, barely audible, yet piercing enough to stop Julia's heart. "Grandma, we need to leave now." Julia turned, startled by the seriousness in Emily's tone. The little girl's fingers tightened around her grandmother's hand with surprising strength. Emily's eyes, usually bright with curiosity, were fixed not on the departing plane but somewhere behind them. Julia followed her gaze casually, trying not to draw attention. 2 men in dark suits stood near the security checkpoint. Nothing about them was openly threatening. They held no weapons, spoke to no one. Yet their eyes scanned the terminal with a precision that unsettled her. When their gaze lingered just a moment too long on her and Emily, a long-buried instinct stirred. "Let's get to the car," Julia said softly, forcing a calm smile as if the decision were casual. "It's getting late." She adjusted her handbag and began walking toward the exit with measured steps. Not too fast, not too slow. Emily stayed close, holding Mr. Bunny tightly as if the toy could shield them both. Julia's mind raced, but her face remained composed. She had lived long enough to know one truth: when a child spoke with such conviction, you listened. Julia moved through the bustling terminal with a steady pace, every step measured to avoid suspicion. Years of teaching had taught her the art of control. Never let the room sense your fear, never let the students know they had rattled you. Now that same discipline kept her shoulders square and her stride calm. Inside, however, her chest tightened with dread. The automatic doors opened, and the cool spring air hit her face. She took Emily's hand and crossed the drop-off lane toward the parking garage. Behind them, the echo of polished shoes quickened. Julia dared not look back. Emily clung to Mr. Bunny with both arms, whispering, "Grandma, Daddy said if men in dark clothes show up, we can't talk to them. We just go." Julia's stomach sank. This wasn't a child's imagination. David had warned his daughter, and in doing so, he had entrusted Julia with a responsibility far heavier than she could have imagined. They reached Julia's sedan, an aging silver Toyota with a dented bumper. She slid Emily into the back seat, fastening the belt with shaking fingers. Just as she shut the door, she spotted a black sub idling 2 rows away, headlights off, windows tinted. Her heart pounded. She slid into the driver's seat, turned the key, and forced herself to exhale slowly. "It's just another car," she muttered, though she didn't believe it. Pulling out, she maneuvered down the ramp, merging into traffic. In the rearview mirror, the sub rolled out moments later, slipping into the lane behind her. Julia's mind raced. Where could she go? Home was out of the question. If David had prepared Emily with coded instructions, then whatever he had uncovered at his firm was dangerous enough to put them all at risk. She exited the airport grounds, weaving through evening traffic. The sub followed at a polite distance, never too close, never too far. Professional. "Emily," Julia said, her voice calm though her knuckles whitened on the wheel, "did your father give you anything else? A note? A message?" Emily shook her head, then hugged Mr. Bunny tighter. "Just him. He said to stay with you. He said you'd know what to do." Julia swallowed the lump in her throat. She didn't know what to do, but she knew one thing: hesitation was dangerous. She had raised David alone after her husband's death. She had survived long nights of double shifts, unpaid bills, and the weight of single motherhood. She had endured before. She could endure now. She made a sharp turn into a crowded shopping plaza, circling behind a row of delivery trucks. For a brief moment, the sub disappeared from her mirror. Julia parked, shut off the engine, and whispered, "We'll switch cars." Emily looked up, puzzled. "But Grandma, we don't have another car." Julia managed a thin smile. "Then we'll borrow one." Julia guided Emily through the maze of parked vehicles, weaving past delivery vans until they slipped through the back entrance of a large department store. Her heart hammered in her chest, but she forced her voice into a steady, reassuring tone. "We're just shopping, sweetheart. Stay close." Inside, the store's fluorescent lights and the chatter of customers gave them a thin cover of normalcy. Julia bought a pair of sunglasses and a baseball cap. Cash only. With her hair tucked under the cap and the glasses shielding her eyes, she looked less like a retired schoolteacher and more like a tired grandmother blending into the crowd. She steered Emily toward a small cafe at the far end of the store. From their corner table, Julia could see the parking lot through wide glass windows. The black sub cruised slowly down the row, searching. She clenched her jaw, then turned back to Emily, who was absent-mindedly stroking Mr. Bunny's worn ear. Something in the toy caught Julia's attention. The rabbit had always been Emily's favorite, but tonight, David's earlier warnings echoed in her mind. Julia leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Sweetheart, can I hold Mr. Bunny for a minute?" Emily hesitated, then nodded. Julia gently felt along the seams, fingers brushing against an unusual hardness inside the stuffing. With a careful tug at the stitching near the paw, she uncovered a tiny hidden pocket. Inside was a slim USB drive wrapped in paper. Her breath caught. This was no accident. David had planned this. Hands trembling, Julia unfolded the note. Her son's handwriting was rushed but clear. "Mom, if you're reading this, it means they've found me. The company is not what it seems. They're laundering money, funding weapons. I couldn't stay silent. This drive has proof. Take Emily. Trust no one except the instructions inside. Go to the library. Look for the book, The Federalist Papers, second floor, history section. Inside, you'll find what you need. Be careful. I'm sorry I put you in danger. I love you. David." Julia closed her eyes, fighting the sting of tears. She had always admired David's dedication, but she had not realized the depth of his courage or the peril it had brought upon them. Emily's small hand reached across the table. "Grandma, is Daddy okay?" Julia swallowed hard, forcing herself to answer gently, "Your daddy is very brave. He wants us to be safe, and that means we have to be brave too." She slipped the USB into her handbag and restitched the rabbit's paw with a sewing kit she found in her purse. When Mr. Bunny was whole again, Emily hugged him tight, unaware of the secrets he carried. After waiting until the SUV drove past and disappeared from sight, Julia led Emily out through a side exit. They walked several blocks before hailing a taxi, giving the driver cash and a vague destination. "Take us to the public library downtown." As the cab pulled away, Julia pressed her forehead lightly against the cool glass of the window. She had taught generations of students about history's heroes, men and women who had risked everything to stand for truth. She never imagined she would be asked to join their ranks. The city lights blurred outside, but her resolve sharpened. Whatever lay inside that book at the library, she would find it. She owed that to David. She owed it to Emily. And perhaps, for the first time, she owed it to herself? The taxi dropped them 2 blocks from the downtown library, a towering stone building that seemed both ancient and protective. Julia paid the driver in cash, thanked him, and held Emily's hand as they blended into the crowd of evening commuters. Her eyes scanned every reflection in the glass windows they passed, searching for signs of pursuit. Inside, the library smelled of paper and quiet. Rows of shelves stretched endlessly, and the soft shuffle of shoes echoed between them. Julia guided Emily to the second floor, heart pounding with each step. The history section loomed ahead. She pulled the Federalist Papers from the shelf, pretending to study its spine, as if she were a scholar returning to a familiar friend. Her fingers trembled as she flipped it open. Between the pages lay a slim envelope taped carefully against the binding. She slipped it into her handbag before anyone could notice, then replaced the book exactly where it had been. They sat at a study table tucked in the corner. With shaking hands, Julia opened the envelope. Inside was a small brass key marked with a number and another note in David's handwriting. "Safety deposit box. Bank of Chicago. Branch on Wabash Avenue. Cash will be inside, plus a second drive. If anything happens to me, give everything to Michael Turner at the Chicago Herald. He is the only one you can trust." Julia's throat tightened. A safety deposit box meant David had been planning this for weeks, maybe months. He had hidden layers of protection, each one more dangerous than the last. She tucked the key into her purse and looked at Emily, who was coloring quietly on a scrap of paper with crayons from Julia's bag. The child's innocence in the middle of this storm nearly broke her heart. Just then, Julia noticed movement near the library's entrance. 2 men in dark suits stood there, scanning the room with unnatural patience. They didn't belong in this place of silence and learning. Julia lowered her head, whispering, "Emily, we need to leave." They exited through a side stairwell, descending into the shadows of the street. Julia hailed another cab, this time giving a different destination, first a grocery store on the other side of town. She needed to shake the tail she felt pressing closer with every turn. Hours later, when she finally approached the Bank of Chicago, her pulse raced. She carried Emily in one arm and the envelope in her other hand, praying the disguise of an ordinary grandmother would shield her. Inside the quiet lobby, Julia presented the key. The clerk guided her to a private room where a small metal box was placed on the table. Julia's breath caught as she unlocked it. Inside lay a thick stack of bills, another USB drive, and a prepaid cell phone. Taped to the underside of the lid was a folded map marked with an address: Michael Turner's office at the Chicago Herald. But as Julia gathered the items, a prickle crawled up her spine. Through the narrow window of the private room, she saw a man leaning against the lobby counter, his gaze fixed not on paperwork, but on the hallway leading to her. Her instincts screamed. She quickly closed the box, shoved the contents into her handbag, and gripped Emily's hand. "Time to go," she whispered, her voice firm. They slipped out a side door into the alley, where a battered taxi idled, as if waiting for them. Behind the wheel was Ramon, Maria's cousin, who had driven Julia years ago during a school field trip. His eyes widened when he recognized her, then softened with understanding. "Where to, Mrs. Simmons?" he asked. Julia exhaled, the weight of her choice pressing heavily. The Herald. We're running out of time. The Chicago Herald building stood tall against the night sky, its glowing sign flickering slightly, as though the truth inside were struggling to stay lit. Julia stepped out of Ramon's taxi, clutching Emily's hand with one arm and her handbag with the other. Inside, the newsroom hummed with the clatter of keyboards and the low murmur of voices. Reporters leaned over desks, papers scattered everywhere, phones ringing. Julia felt out of place in her cardigan and sensible shoes, but she forced herself forward. "I need to see Michael Turner," she told the receptionist, her voice steadier than she felt. Moments later, a tall man in his 40s approached. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, his tie loosened, and his eyes were sharp with curiosity. "Miss Simmons?" Julia nodded. "I was told you could be trusted." He ushered her into a glass-walled office. Julia set her handbag on the desk, withdrew the USB drive and the map, and slid them across to him. "My son gave me this. He said if anything happened, I should find you." Michael plugged the drive into his laptop, and the screen filled with spreadsheets, emails, and scanned documents. His face hardened as he scrolled. "This is huge. Money laundering on an international scale. Weapons shipments disguised as humanitarian aid. Pension funds disappearing into shell companies." Julia's heart sank. So it's true. David was right. Michael leaned back, exhaling. "If we publish this, people will go to prison. But it also means they'll come for you and for me. Do you have somewhere safe to stay?" Before Julia could answer, Emily tugged on her sleeve. "Grandma," she whispered, pointing to the window. Outside, on the street below, a black SUV had pulled up. Two men stepped out, scanning the building. Michael cursed under his breath. "They're fast." Julia's voice dropped low. "We can't be here when they come in." Michael yanked the drive from his laptop and slipped it into his pocket. "I'll make copies tonight. You two need to disappear, now." He led them through the maze of desks toward a service stairwell at the back of the building. The thud of footsteps echoed from the front entrance as the men in suits entered. Julia's pulse raced, but she kept Emily close, moving swiftly down the narrow stairs. At the bottom, a metal door opened into a dim alley. Ramon's taxi waited, engine running. Michael pressed Julia's hand firmly. "Go! I'll stall them. And Mrs. Simmons, your son, was right to trust you." Julia climbed into the taxi with Emily, slamming the door as Ramon pulled away. Through the rear window, she caught a final glimpse of Michael disappearing back inside, shoulders squared, ready to face the storm. Emily leaned against her, whispering, "Grandma, will Daddy be proud?" Julia tightened her arm around the child. Her voice was soft but resolute. "Yes, sweetheart. He already is." The city's lights faded behind them as Ramon drove north, his hands steady on the wheel despite the tension that filled the car. Julia sat in the back with Emily curled against her side, Mr. Bunny resting between them. The child had finally drifted into a light sleep, her small breath steady and warm, a fragile reminder of innocence in the midst of chaos. "Where are we headed?" Ramon asked quietly. Julia hesitated before answering. There's a cabin, Cedar Lake. My husband built it years ago. Hardly anyone knows it's still ours." Ramon nodded. "Remote is good, harder to track." Hours later, the narrow roads turned to gravel, and the air smelled of pine and damp earth. The cabin appeared at the edge of the lake, its wooden porch weathered but sturdy, windows reflecting the moonlight. For the first time that day, Julia felt the faintest flicker of safety. Inside, the cabin was musty but familiar. Family photos still lined the mantel, and the quilt she had stitched decades ago hung over the back of the couch. Emily awoke, rubbing her eyes. "Grandma, are we hiding here?" Julia smoothed the girl's hair. "Just for a little while. This place will keep us safe tonight." But even as she spoke, her instincts told her safety was temporary. The men who followed them were professionals. If David's warnings were true, Global Equity Partners had resources that stretched across borders. The following morning, Julia brewed coffee on the old stove while Emily played with blocks on the rug. For a brief moment, the normalcy felt almost real until the sound of a car crunching gravel outside shattered the illusion. Julia's heart leapt. She motioned for Emily to stay quiet and peeked through the curtain. A figure stepped out of the car, tall and slim, carrying a small overnight bag. The porch creaked as the woman approached. Julia's breath caught when the knock came. "Julia, it's me, Rachel." Emily's head jerked up. "Mom?" Julia opened the door cautiously. Standing there was Rachel Simmons, Emily's mother, Julia's former daughter-in-law. She looked weary but determined. "I came as soon as David contacted me," Rachel said, her voice urgent. "He told me everything. They know about this cabin. We can't stay long." Julia's knees nearly buckled. Relief, suspicion, and fear collided all at once. "Why are you here now, after all this time?" Rachel's eyes softened as she looked at her daughter. "Because David said our family's only chance is if we stand together, and because they're already on their way." Julia realized the truth. The fight was far from over. The cabin was not the end of their journey, it was merely a pause before the storm closed in. The cabin no longer felt like a refuge. The moment Rachel stepped inside, urgency replaced the fragile comfort Julia had clung to. She packed quickly, cached the USB drives, a change of clothes for Emily. Rachel explained in hushed tones that David had sent her instructions before he disappeared. His final message was clear: head north, cross into Canada, and wait for contact. By dusk, Ramon returned, headlights off as he pulled into the trees. "They're searching the main road," he warned. "If you want to move, it has to be now." Julia wrapped Emily in a thick sweater, holding her close as they climbed into the car. The ride through backcountry roads was long and tense, every pair of headlights in the distance a potential threat. Emily whispered questions: "Where are we going? Will Daddy find us?" And Julia answered each with quiet reassurance, even when her own certainty wavered. Near midnight, Ramon stopped at a trailhead deep in the forest. "This is as far as I go. Follow the path north. A friend will meet you by the river." Julia squeezed his hand. "You've done more than enough. Thank you." The forest closed around them, the crunch of leaves underfoot the only sound. Julia carried a flashlight, its beam thin against the vast darkness. Emily clung to Mr. Bunny, her small voice steady. "Grandma, I'm not scared, because you're here." Julia's heart swelled. She had spent decades teaching history's lessons about courage and sacrifice, yet here, in the silence of the woods, she was learning her own. At the riverbank, a shadow emerged. "Julia?" a voice called softly. A woman stepped forward, her face illuminated by the moonlight. Julia recognized her instantly: Diane Matthews, an old friend of David's from college, now dressed in field gear, her posture sharp and disciplined. "David trusted me to get you across," Diane said. "There's a safe house on the Canadian side. He's waiting." Relief flooded Julia so strongly she nearly stumbled. With Diane's guidance, they crossed the river in a small boat, the current strong but manageable. On the opposite shore, a simple farmhouse stood under the stars. Its porch light glowed faintly, a beacon of survival. The door opened before they reached it. David stood there, tired, unshaven, but alive. Emily broke free from Julia's grasp, running into her father's arms. Rachel followed, tears streaming silently. Julia reached the porch last, her steps slow, her chest heavy with both exhaustion and gratitude. David pulled her into an embrace, his voice breaking. "I knew you'd keep her safe, Mom. I knew you'd keep us all safe." For the first time in days, Julia allowed herself to breathe. The nightmare wasn't over. There would be questions, investigations, dangers still lurking. but for now her family was together, and that was enough. She looked at Emily, safe in her father's arms, and felt a clarity she hadn't known in years. Courage wasn't always loud or reckless. Sometimes it was quiet, steady, and stubborn. Sometimes it looked like a grandmother who refused to give up. Julia raised her chin, her voice steady. "We'll face whatever comes next, together." And with those words, the fear that had haunted her steps dissolved into something stronger: resolve.